As you've probably already heard, the possibility of Pokemon Black and White remakes are a very popular topic within the Pokemon community at the moment. However, the community is somewhat split about how these remakes should be done and whether the Pokemon company should be doing remakes at all. Some players would love to see one-to-one remakes, as we saw with Pokemon Brilliant Diamond and Shining Pearl. Some players want a Black and White 3, whilst others would love a new game entirely, more specifically a Pokemon Legends game set in Unova. In this video, what I want to talk about is what I would love to see in a Pokemon Gen 5 game on the Switch, my thoughts on what they should do with the story and gameplay, and I also want to talk about a couple options for how they can do these games from a graphical perspective and what we can learn about from previous remakes. Personally, what I would love to see is either a port or a remake of Pokemon Black and White, and even Black and White 2. I'd love to be able to play both these games on my TV, and I never played Black and White 2, so I'd love to be able to experience this game for the first time. The stories of Pokemon Black and White and Black and White 2 have split the community quite a bit. And depending on how much you trust Reddit, there was a discussion a few years back about whether people thought the stories were good or not. And to be honest, I don't see a need for change. I absolutely loved Pokemon Black and White the first time I played through it when I was about 10 when it came out, and I still do. I played it through recently and I still think the story holds up well. And those stories are part of the reason for me wanting the games available on Switch, so I can replay the same games I loved as a kid on the big screen. If Game Freak was to make changes to the story, one thing I would love to see though, and this is something Fundoris raised in their Pokemon Black and White wishlist video, is the idea of having Black and White 1 and 2 combined into one game somehow. We've already seen this sort of thing happen with Gen 2, so I don't think it's a stretch, but some reworking would be required to make the stories link well and to balance the gameplay so that you can continue on with your existing party. For some players, Pokemon Black and White was a very divisive entry in the series. A lot of players had an issue with the fact you could only catch Gen 5 Pokemon during the mainline story, and you couldn't access any older Pokemon until the post-game. I personally never had any issue with only having Gen 5 Pokemon available until post-game. It was my second Pokemon game, I didn't care, and to be honest, it still doesn't affect me whether a certain Pokemon is available or not. However, in a remake, I think having older Pokemon available during the full story before post-game wouldn't hurt and would make a lot of fans happy. I am somewhat split on whether Pokemon from later games should be available in these remakes at all. I'm leaning towards no, but personally I don't see this as a make or break factor for me. In terms of the battle system, I've never had any issue with it, so I don't see any reason to change it. I don't have any desire for change either, so keeping the system is absolutely fine in my opinion. Another point I've seen discussed online a lot is the idea of bringing back Mega Evolutions or Dynamax or some sort of gameplay mechanic like that to the games. If they're going to do Black and White 3, sure, I can see them bringing that and it being fine. But if they're going to do remakes of 1 and 2, I don't think they should be bringing in Mega Evolutions or another gameplay mechanic like that. I think for the most part they should be keeping the games faithful to the originals, with no major changes whatsoever. And I think bringing in Mega Evolutions or another gameplay mechanic like that would just be too much and it wouldn't fit in well with the gameplay. For a gameplay mechanic like that to work, they would have to rework the story a little bit or come up with a new story entirely, and at that point it becomes a reimagining or a new game entirely, so I don't think that's something that should be included in a remake. No matter what Game Freak does, the one thing that needs to happen is they need to keep the original magic of the first releases. Having played Pokemon Black when I was about 10 or 11 when they first came out, the first time I rode over the bridge to Castelia City and walking around Castelia City for the first time absolutely blew my tiny little mind. If that mind-blowing feeling isn't there in whatever game they bring to Switch, I think that'll be the major breaking point for me personally. I also think that's where Pokemon BDSP has failed. Even before the release, people were bagging on the chibi style and the art style that they chose. I personally didn't love the art style, it just didn't have the magic or trigger the nostalgia that I had for Pokemon Diamond and Pearl. And I feel like this was a common feeling for a lot of people, especially critics, as these two games are two of the worst reviewed mainline games on Metacritic. On top of this, if you do a side-by-side comparison of the remakes and the originals, the designs that they've used in the remakes just feel lifeless in comparison, and that was just a really disappointing thing to see. I personally think they could have chosen a better art style, but I didn't see this as a major issue like some people did. Something like what we saw on Pokemon Let's Go or Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire would have been nicer in my opinion and brought more life to the games. One thing some people took issue with is that the remakes were too faithful and didn't offer enough changes. I didn't have an issue with this and was happy to see my first Pokemon games on the big screen. With Black and White though, quality of life changes are good, but I don't see the need to bring huge changes to the games. Making changes on a similar level to what they did with the Gen 3 remakes would be good, as they were pretty faithful, but did make some cool changes such as adding more lore to the sunken ship on Route 108. But there are two major changes I would love to see in the Black and White remakes. remakes, and that's Pokemon following you around everywhere in the overworld, and Pokemon being visible in the tall grass / generally in the overworld, like we saw in Pokemon Let's Go, we saw it in Sword and Shield, Scarlet and Violet, and Pokemon Legends. I just think that having your Pokemon follow you everywhere is just a fantastic feature, although very minor, and I think it's something that should be in all games moving forward, so I think this definitely needs to be in the remakes. Pokemon being visible in the overworld I also think should be a staple in the series moving forward, whether the games are open world or not. We saw it first, and I'll stand corrected on this in Let's Go. I think that was my favourite feature of Let's Go, and it's what made the wild area in Sword and Shield so magic and so special. I think it would add to the quality of life of these games, especially since we know it's possible on the Switch. From a graphical perspective, I see two pathways forward for the Black and White remakes, and this is something I've touched on before as well. I'd like to see either a Live Alive style pixel remaster, or I'd like to see an Omega Ruby, Alpha Sapphire, or Let's Go style remake without the Let's Go medal system. For those of you who don't know, Live Alive is a 1994 Super Famicom game by Square Enix that was recently released in English for the first time on Switch and then on PlayStation and Windows later on. Before I get into why I like the style, if you haven't played this game and you like old school JRPGs, you should definitely give this game a go. It's absolutely fantastic. I played it recently for the first time and I absolutely loved it. The reason why I used Live Alive as an example of what a good pixel remaster looked like is because this is what the original looked like back in 1994 on the Super Famicom, and this is what the remake looks like. You might recognize it looks like Octopath Traveler, and that's because it's got the same HD 2D visual style by the same studio and same publisher, so it's kind of expected. This remaster though takes what was already a fantastic game and brings it to life in a way they couldn't 30 years ago, and it keeps what was already magic about the original at its core. We've seen examples of what this could look like for Pokemon previously, with Dot creating a tech demo of what Pokemon Red and Blue would look like in this HD 2D style remaster, and it shows some real promise, and it gives us inspiration for what could be done with these remakes. The bottom line here is, an HD 2D remake of the Pokemon Black and White games is possible, but in the same way that Live Alive's remake kept the magic of the original and brought it to life in new ways that weren't possible back in the 90s, we need this exact same treatment for the Black and White remakes. Though I don't think a side-by-side comparison of the original and what the remakes could look like will be as dramatic, I do think there's some opportunity for greatness there. The other pathway for this remake graphically that I mentioned earlier, and the option that I think is more likely to happen of these two ideas, is a Let's Go style 3D remake. From a graphical perspective, I think Pokemon Let's Go was a solid game. These games brought the original Pokemon games to a new console in a way that was accessible and enjoyable to a lot of newcomers to the series and older fans alike. However, the main fault for this game was, in my opinion, the Pokemon Go gameplay system, and it's something I struggled to get on board with, and is one of the reasons why I didn't end up finishing this game. It's still got better scores than BDSP on Metacritic, so it can't have been that bad. One thing that I think can't be denied is that this game looked great. It had the Pokemon following mechanic, which I mentioned before, which I love and I absolutely liked in this game. It brought the world to life by having Pokemon visible in the tall grass, which is a mechanic that I don't think would be as effective in a 2D or a pixel art style. I can also see it keeping the wow factor that the 3D perspectives in Black and White had, like that bridge crossing that I talked about before leading up to Castelia City, and is one of the reasons why I think this is a great pathway forward for these remakes, even more so than a pixel remaster. One thing I do want to touch on quickly is the idea of a Pokemon Legends game set in the Unova region. I think this is a fantastic idea and is something I would definitely love to see on the Switch or even the Switch 2. However, I don't think this should be a replacement for remakes. I think they should exist alongside each other, just like we saw with Pokemon BDSP and Legends Arceus. Two games, both set in the Sinnoh region, and I think it's very possible for them to do this again with Gen 5. So those are my thoughts on what I think should be done with the Gen 5 games and what the future of the series might hold. Let me know what you think, whether you agree with me or not, and what you think should be done with these games. I hope you enjoyed the video and I'll see you in the next one.